to teach the next hour how to do social marketing. So, social media is using the technology. So we're not going to touch this out here. Ignore it. We're going to get the room nice and warm and toasty by participating, hopefully. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, Detroit Working Writers. This is me, John R. Monteith. I'll give you a bit of my background and do introductions so we can all kind of hopefully participate, talk a little bit about what we enjoy doing for writing. If you want to follow along, I've got notes online. You can go to subthriller.com /DWW. That'll have these notes and my email address. And I don't know if they covered this in the amphitheater earlier, but this is the network and the password so you can get online. So I'll give you a moment to go ahead and get online while I talk about myself, hopefully as quickly as possible. I've been writing for 13 years since I published my first novel. At this point, I've got 17 novels in publication. 2 series. One is a naval submarine adventure, and the other is a paranormal thriller adventure. So I'm into adventures. We all are. I have won a few awards. The biggest one is being a finalist in the Clive Cussler Society Adventure Writers Competition, which if you've heard of it, great. If not, great. You know, awards are just nice things to lend credibility. And actually, I've got some good networking on it. And some good people that I use in my writing circles today.
Who's your publisher?
Me. Okay. I am self-published on Amazon. Exclusive on Amazon, by the way. If there's time at the end, we can talk some marketing and why I go exclusive. But the longer the series, and if it's in the right genre, such as adventures, you do better off sometimes. I'd say in general, you do better when you have you're exclusive to Amazon, and then Kindle Unlimited readers can just borrow your books and you get paid for that. I did the math, excruciating math, and it was better for me to go exclusive with them. So, I think that's all I want to say about myself, because we're not here to talk about me, we're here to talk about adventures. Before I do, let's get to know each other just a little bit in the audience. And let's start. I want to ask just some questions to get us going. Who here has not yet published their first novel? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so the majority of the room actually takes notes. That's good to know. Has anybody here published just one novel? Just one? 2 to 4 novels? 2, 3, 4? No? 5 or more? There we go. 2? 10 or more? Ooh. I gotta keep going. 20 or more?
How many?
20.
Oh,
There's
I'm
the winner,
19.
Sybil. 19. Wow. All right. So, you
I'm
experts.
45. Oh
When
my
it comes
God.
time to volunteer, I'm looking for you two to chime in.
45.
40?
45.
Ooh, off the charts. Congratulations.
I have no life.
Yes, you do.
I don't sleep.
Has anybody else published another work, like short stories, screenplays? Here we go. Okay, so more than half of us have been published. Okay, all right, it's a good mix. So let's dive into the material. I called this workshop Writing Adventure Fiction. So that begs the question, what is an adventure? We all know what writing is, we all know what fiction is. So let's start with, well, we're done with introductions. So let's define adventure. And of course, I've done this ahead of time because since I'm running the workshop, shame on me if I didn't do that. But let's hear some thoughts, because I don't think it's that obvious. So I'm going to start with Sybil, because you've written 45 books. What do you think is an adventure?
Well, an adventure, in terms of, as a writer, you're taking the reader on a journey through several arcs and subplots until you bring the hero to the promise that you made at the beginning.
Okay, journey. I'm gonna write down the things that are sticking in my mind. Journey's good. Not that the rest of it was bad, I'm just,
Oh, no.
how much did I remember of what you just said?
So you're
Journey.
taking the reader on a journey through in technical terms, arcs, story
Right, right.
arcs and, plots.
Promise. I liked your point about a promise.
Yeah, and
Fulfilled promise.
To the promise that you made from the beginning.
Go a little bit into the promise. What is a promise?
Well, kind of at the beginning of the story, you are promising the reader that this is going to happen. In other terms, this is going to happen, besides the consequences and the punishments and everything, despite everything, I'm going to promise this story to you.
Okay. Promise, sounds like foreshadowing too.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good, thanks. Anybody else? Pat?
I think of a adventure as a quest. And it could be a journey, but there's a goal associated with that journey. It's not just a road trip. There's something here at the end.
Hold on, let's let, I wanna digest what Pat said, and I'm digesting it, and it, to me, stick with the metaphor of digesting, it tastes a lot like what Sybil just said, and coming at it from a different angle. A quest, a journey, a promise to reach a goal.
Yep.
I think we could talk all day about what it is and use different words, and never reuse the same words, but we'd all understand the same concept of what an adventure is. Well, let's keep going, one more. CK.
My adventures tend to have a lot of travel in them. I mean, it doesn't have to, but I always, when I think of an adventure novel, I think of traveling to some exotic location and, going on a treasure hunt or something like that. Or an expedition.
Exotic, I like it, but I'm having trouble spelling it.
TIC, you got it, yeah.
And travel.
But it could be traveling through the haunted house too.
That's true. Yeah. Traveling.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be
each
travel
mind.
across the galaxy, it doesn't have to be travel across a planet, it could be travel across a room.
Right.
Okay. All right, let's hear.
Sandy.
Sandy, hi.
So I think of adventure fiction as having a certain pace. I mean, not consistent all the time, but it's gotta move.
Mhm.
And that the challenges will be more physical than internal emotional things. Although fear, heart-stopping fear, that could definitely be part of it, and that's an emotion.
All right, you hit my favorite thing, pace. We're gonna talk about pace later,
I
about
didn't
pace.
read that.
No, I know, you sounded authentic, so. But you had some other good stuff in there, you had fear, which we'll rope in later when we talk about danger. I use the words exciting and danger. And, did you say action?
No, I was gonna say action.
I read your mind. Okay, action. I'm sorry, Sandy, I missed one of your points there.
Well, I said that there needed to be a certain pace. You don't meander through an adventure fiction story. You move.
Right, you had pace, you had fear, and I think you had one other.
That a lot of the barriers to the
Physical.
main character are physical.
Right, thank you.
They're not mental as much.
Right, okay, because I'll be covering that too in different form, when we talk about a plot-driven versus character-driven approach. That'll actually be plot-driven. Thank you, Sandy. And action by Jamie, is it?
No, Lanny.
Lanny, sorry, and I even met you when you walked in the door, sorry.
I was just surprised that we hadn't said the word action yet,
Yeah.
because oftentimes action, adventure comes up.
Yeah, and on the genres, when you look at Amazon, you look at all the 10,000 genres, but go up to the top of the big ones, and it's action and adventure. Yes, Pat?
Can't they also be cerebral too? Like Dan Brown, scientist, you have to have the person with the background, the thinking to get through the physical obstacle.
Ciphering out the puzzles and the symbols, and there's like
Yeah.
intellectual aspects to the adventure.
Right.
Yes, I think you can. But if you'll allow me, I'm going to set that aside for today's workshop. Because, I think that's actually harder to do. I mean, if you're gonna write an adventure, it's probably best to start with something that's more physical and action oriented. Get the techniques down, and then deal with something that's more psychological, cerebral on your second, third efforts.
And maybe that's why Dan Brown wrote one really good book, then rewrote it 4 times.
Two really good books. I like Angels and Demons as well.
But the others are copies of the same thing.
Exactly.
Just change from for form.
Yeah. Okay.
We haven't mentioned characters yet.
Nope, we have not.
And I
We're
think-
defining adventure, and if you want to, it'd be a good segue to where I wanna go, so.
Well, when I think of an adventure, there's always a protagonist and almost always an antagonist.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So we've got, protagonist, antagonist. I'm not gonna write that down because we're gonna cover it here in the characters section.
Can I add a word?
Yes, you may.
Swashbuckling.
Wow, that was worth the price of admission alone.
Now you gotta spell it.
Yeah,
S-W-A-S-H.
you can the ones I can't spell.
Swash and then buckle.
Swash, buckle, lane.
There you go.
I'm not sure I would have written that if you hadn't used the power of suggestion, so, but you did. All right, so I think we've done a good job of finding adventure. The words I want to focus on, which, if it doesn't make sense to you, speak up, but I think this covers most of it, is you're taking someone, which covers our journey, our quest, our travel. We're taking someone, or I'll say multiple people, because we're taking characters and readers someplace abnormal and new, and it's gonna be exciting and dangerous. And I'm even going to say tropes, but hold on, let me get us to tropes. So we all agree exciting and new. Does exciting, danger, new, abnormal all kind of make sense? Does it cover the universe of, enough of the universe? I think it does, but I just wanna make sure we all kind of agree on that. Because the whole point about having defined adventure fiction is for us to have discussion here for an hour. After that, the framework goes away, and you just take the lessons with you. So, let's move on from writing adventure fiction, and as far as the definition, so cross it off. And just, I should have made some final points before I crossed it off, so let me make the final points. If you wanna take a reader someplace abnormal, one way you can be assured of that is to make up your own world, right? Sci-fi, fantasy, so we see that a lot. You could also just come up with a series of events that no one else has ever conceived. And I put an asterisk there, no one else has ever conceived. Well, somebody's conceived of just about every conflict that you and I can think of, right? You know, there's the saying, there's no such thing as great writing, there's just great rewriting. So when you're using your imagination to come up with an adventure, you're coming up with places to go, you're coming up with conflicts. If it excites you, it's probably good enough to excite the reader. You'll never be completely unique, and that's okay. You'll have your own flavor, your own style. But this is where I wanted to talk about the tropes, is that if you get too crazy, like if you come up with a 10-headed, 7-horned beast that's from some galaxy that nobody's heard of, and you're just out in left field, nobody's gonna know how to connect with that. So, does everybody know what a trope is before I get into too much detail? So, this is where it's kind of like, it's okay, it's not quite plagiarism, you don't plagiarize, but you wanna use the tropes. And some adventure tropes, you know, you just think, one of my favorites, I have to admit, Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen, right? The dystopian world adolescent, is it adolescent teenager, I don't know, someone in their mid to late teens is thrust into combat, and it works for Hunger Games, it works for Divergent, Allegiant, it works for Maze Runner, right? So, you know, And it's okay that this trope gets reused, it's okay if you reuse tropes, your job is to use your imagination. And we're not gonna talk too much about imagination here, because frankly, I think you're a writer, you have a good one. I don't need to nurture that. You don't need to nurture that today. You've got a good imagination. You just need to put a framework to get it moving forward. So, how to do that? Let's move on with characterization. Some terms that have thrown me off before I wanna define clearly is plot-driven versus character-driven. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I was doing my research, plot-driven is, well, actually, character-driven, I used to think meant the character did a lot of stuff and drove the plot forward. But it's more like character-focused. It's more like the cerebral thing that Pat was talking about. What's going on in a character's head? How is a character developing? How are interpersonal relationships happening? And it's not exactly what you were saying, but it's kind of like a pitfall. If you're trying to write an adventure that's cerebral, you might end up doing character development by accident.
Yep.
And you might end up creating a character-driven story by accident. And that's not terrible. You do need to develop characters. In every adventure, we want to see something happen to the character, even if it's just a little bit. But what we're going for is what's called plot-driven, where the external world, we were saying physical safety, we're concerned about, someone over here said travel, is it CK? Yeah, it's something that you're gonna be able to see. We're going somewhere, we're going on a journey. So the character has to be able to make quick decisions. This gets us into pace. We don't want the character to sit there and brood and think, do I wanna take on this conflict? Am I capable of this? Am I doing this to become closer or farther away in a personal relationship? No, I'm gonna go do something that is visible, that's action oriented. So this gets us into what's called plot-driven approach. But that being said, I wanna start talking about characters first, because as Richard said, we have a protagonist and an antagonist. You have to get those right. If you get the wrong character into your adventure, that character won't drive the story. So let's talk about characters a little bit. But before I do, I want to ask a question of everybody. So I'll give you two choices. When you're setting out to write a story, do you generally think about a riveting plot first, or do you think about compelling characters first? So raise your hand if you're more plot oriented too. I guess I'll make a third category if I'm sure. Character driven. You're thinking more compelling characters. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so most of us are character driven. So that could be a challenge. It's not good, it's not bad. It is what it is. If you're more like the five of you that are into the character, and you consider that I just said that we're going to minimize character development, you might be thinking, well, I want to develop a character. Stories are about people. Well, you can keep part. When you're writing an adventure, you're going to have to work on more decisive action by your character and less the internal monologue, less the internal development, even less person-to-person, interpersonal relationship. I see a smirk in the audience. I won't say who, but is this landing with everybody, or is it not making sense? I'm picking on you, Lanny? Yeah, because you're smirking.
I was working. It's heading home.
Is it? Okay. Well, that's good then. So that implies we're challenging the paradigm. Okay, Sandy. Yes.
So, I've been thinking about the characters first usually. But this summer I reread, On Writing by, Stephen King.
Yeah.
And when he talked about how he tries to envision a situation, that sounds easier. You know, like what if a writer ends up in the home of a deranged woman, and he can't move and she holds him in the bed? What can happen? So that's kind of that's kind of a cool way to approach it, and then you can spin off on who the character is, in more detail. But he put me in mind of thinking of situations,
Yeah, and,
which is plot, more.
yeah, well, you bring up an excellent point, is that they go hand in hand. Because we as people don't develop unless we're out living, doing something. Sitting at home is safe and boring, getting out the door is, that's where you get into your excitement, your abnormal situations, and your danger. And, yeah, I mean, you're catching me here where I'm saying it's a framework, and I'm glad that you've called out that it's not in isolation. You can't develop a person in isolation, you can't have a plot in isolation. I think that's the point that you're trying to make.
I was just thinking, basically this is another way to show character. Instead of doing all the internal monologue, you're saying, how does this character choose, what action does this character choose? So you're approaching character through action points, as, you know, do you choose A or B or C or whatever it is. You know, instead of going, you know, navel gazing or a lot of internal monologue or whatever, you're doing character, but you're doing it through how this character moves through a situation and what, you know, action points are chosen. So it's just a different way of handling character, you know, even though it's a plot. You know, it reveals what the person's character is in this situation. What are you choosing? You know, so that's how I'm just looking at it.
Cindy, I like when you said you reveal, because that's exactly what I think is going on there. You as the writer have to get to know your character, which is why I put characters ahead of plot here, even though I'm saying plotting is, the plot-driven story is more important for the adventure. We have to get the character right. You may have to develop the character completely in your mind, just not on paper, right? And that will be revealed through the action. So, you can have, was that, Misery, was that the story where the man was held captive in a deranged woman's bedroom? That helped.
Yeah.
That helped develop the character, but the character also helped drive the plot. They do go hand in hand. And if you know your character 100% up here, which takes a lot of effort, you can reveal them through the adventure. I think that hits the nail on the head. Okay, CK?
Yep. I'm just in total agreement with what you all are saying, and to expound on that, like, when I sit down to write a story, I use, you know, some people call it the pyramid method, where I just start with the concept, just like the tagline, and then I kind of start with like, okay, what would the blurb on the back of the book say? What makes a compelling story? Because you have to know what you're writing about. But then when I decide, okay, who are the characters who are gonna be, you know, the best types of personalities to make this story, this kind of story, the most interesting or the most fun to read or write. And oftentimes I'll do like a whole profile on the characters. Like half of the information never makes it into the book, but it doesn't need to, because it can be implied, and as long as I know it and I understand that character fully, then I can execute that in that story. But yeah, I usually just start with the plot just to make an interesting story. But what you were saying, you want to understand your characters very, very well, but you don't need to find a way to drip all that detail into the actual story.
Perfect, that's a great wrap up, CK. So let's, I wanna make a couple points, and then we're gonna share our characters. Yeah, it's a workshop, right? That means you have to do some work. Okay. I do want to make sure that we have proper motivation, which will fall out of the character development. That they're consistent within themselves. You know, you don't have a risk taker that's all of a sudden shy, that becomes a risk taker again. CK hates that.
I've read many
Yeah.
books that do that,
Yeah.
inconsistent character.
I'm guilty of it. I mean, don't do as I do as I say, right? You go back 13 years, I can hardly read my first book. They are strong and they are weak. Even Superman, who is about as strong as they come, has kryptonite, right? And they're likable. They don't, you know, I don't know why I like Katniss Everdeen, I just do. You know, maybe it's because I wish I had her courage. So, Sybil? Because you've written 45 books. Can you share one of your characters?
I would go with Jalen and Jalen Gates. He's from Stealing Innocence.
I can take some of this down. Tell us about Jalen. What motivates Jalen?
Money
I like
motivates.
him already.
Money and power motivates him. He is,
Sure this is the good guy?
actually, he's got a Godzilla effect about him. He is selfish, though. He cares only about himself. He doesn't want to share anything, and he feels that women are good for one thing.
He doesn't sound very likable.
This is your
But
protagonist.
he has a best friend who is a female, and it's like she's his sister, so she brings out the little.
She reveals the
She
good
reveals
qualities.
it.
I'm gonna say
Good
these are
qualities.
Jalen's weaknesses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
But his strength is his relationship with his best friend.
So he has a friendship bond.
Yeah, he has a great friendship bond.
So we're trying to tie this to adventure. He has a friendship bond. This must change him into someone who can do something, right?
In a bad situation, he comes out the winner, no matter what. So in any kind of situation that you put him in, or someone he cares about is in, he can get in there and make it right.
So I'll say he becomes Superman.
He becomes
Superman.
almost.
I don't draw.
Almost. That was almost.
Do a triangle.
Strong
You know, strong.
when friends are in need.
Already, yes. He's
Okay, that's
he's
a
the
likable
perfect.
trait.
Yeah, he's the perfect best friend.
And I like that you started with this stuff too, money, power, selfish, because how many times do we write the Superman without the kryptonite? Just puts,
Mary Sue. They call it a Mary Sue when your protagonist is just perfect and has no weaknesses or flaws.
I call that my wife.
Aw, that's sweet.
She's sitting in the back of the room.
No couch tonight.
You mean I fit in the bed?
You will allow him a pillow.
So I think likable comes out of that.
Hey.
Strong, weak. I'll just assume you keep them consistent.
Oh, yes.
Motivation is to protect friends.
Mhm.
Okay, thanks, Sybil. Anybody else want to go? It's kind of scary to put it out there, but you're writers, you're putting it all out there eventually, right? Do we just all understand it and want to move on to the next thing? Let's do that. So plotting, let me check my notes because I'm having too much fun and I'm losing focus. You guys are good participants. I'm gonna blow through a couple things really quick here. Story has a beginning, middle, and end, and that's just a framework. I mean, you can talk about a 5-act play, a 3-act play, yada, 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 whatever. Just make sure at the beginning that you introduced your protagonist and the motivation, which is the problem they're trying to solve. Because ultimately there's gonna be a final conflict. There's gonna be a lot of interim conflicts, especially in an adventure. When we're going from point A to point B and we're facing danger, abnormal places, exciting things, there's gonna be a lot of little middle conflicts involved. But early in the story, you wanna set up the final conflict, which is, I think, the promise that you were going for early on. Sybil, and I already erased my notes. Pat, you said the quest for a goal, so it's the
Right.
goal that we're trying to get to. And I also put in here a note to meet the antagonist, but I'll put that in asterisk. Because sometimes you don't meet the antagonist until a little bit later in the story, or if the antagonist is not even a person. It could be like nature, so. Then the middle, build tension, we have middle conflicts. One thing I want to say about the middle though, is to avoid getting too linear. You don't want, it would get boring if my goal were to walk across this room and nothing got in my way. You know, I'm going from point A to point B. What I need is I need to trip. I need to have Pat jump out of the chair and come over and tackle me. You know, it can't be just linear easy. It has to be like I'm almost there, something happens, pulls me back. Again, I'm talking ideals. You know? But if it's just, you know, it's almost a process. You don't want a process. An adventure. An adventure is unexpected stuff happens. But I'm always driving this way because I'm a character that you developed in your mind, and I'm driving the story towards the end, cause and effect. Everything I do from the beginning of the story towards the end of the story has to be cause and effect by a character that's either a protagonist or antagonist. So if I want to walk across the room, I'm the one that's making it happen. And if I'm going to fail, something has to make me fail, right? You don't want just bad luck. A lightning bolt's not going to come hit me. You want to get your coincidence done out of the way early in the story. Everything that could stop me from hitting this goal has to be done by someone working against me.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the difference, and maybe in your opinion, what you think is a better kind of story, if there is one, of the type of adventure about the protagonist, they aren't exactly searching, you know, for adventure, it's just thrust upon them, they're thrust into it, like Bilbo Baggins, you know, is invaded by these, you know, characters that come and kind of force him on this adventure, and he's kind of unwilling all the way, but until he isn't. Or even like Harry Potter, he didn't ask for it, he's like thrust into it, versus maybe Indiana Jones or James Bond, where they signed up for the job that's like, they're looking for adventure, like they know what they're getting themselves into. Is there like, I don't know, I was just curious your thoughts
Yeah,
on.
I'll address that, thanks, CK. Call it the reluctant hero. I mentioned the word coincidence, so let's talk about coincidence and luck, bad luck, good luck. Frodo Baggins. His uncle found the ring a long time ago, even before we opened the book, right? And there's one ring in the entire universe that binds them all, and our hero has it. Well, the chances of that happening are about 0, right? Except that it happened before we opened the book. So our willing suspension of disbelief has taken place when we've opened the book. Harry Potter was a wizard. We knew he was a wizard before he knew he was a wizard, right? So when he gets thrown into it, we expect him to take on this challenge because we've already accepted all this denial that he's going to go through. You know, Frodo didn't know what this thing was. Gandalf didn't even know what it was until partially through the book. Well, we could talk about the dystopian characters. Katniss Everdeen. She sure as heck didn't want to go into the Hunger Games, right? But she had to protect her sister. So what were the chances of by the way, has everybody here seen the Hunger Games? Because I'm using it extensively. So Katniss Everdeen, her younger sister, was picked for basically a death match where 23 out of 24 children are going to die, and she volunteers early in the story to take that on. She didn't want to. The chances of her little sister being picked were about 0. And if you read the book, she actually she minimized her chance by starving herself and feeding her family with animals that she would hunt in the forest, so that she would have fewer tickets in the bowl that they drew out of for her sister. But her sister got picked. That has to happen early in the story to create this reluctance. And once that happens, then the character will have to go through some sort of character development early in the story. Right? And we remember how we said character development is secondary to the plot. But in this case, you're going to have to do some character development up front because the reluctance has to be overcome. Then it becomes quick decisions, quick decisions, quick decisions. You know who this character is. You know how she, Katniss, or he, Harry Potter, are going to respond once they get over the reluctance. Because you know their strengths and weaknesses, you've got their motivations, et cetera, et cetera. So okay, good. I think that covers plotting, other than, let me just make sure I didn't leave anything interesting out. Oh, pace. pace. And you mentioned pace earlier on. I mentioned quick decisions. Credible happens when the person is consistent within themselves. We've talked about final conflict. Pace. This is a trade-off in this case. We've already talked about doing less character development. You also have to do less description. If we're gonna describe this room, I can't go brick by brick, I can't go thread by thread in the carpets and keep a pace. I have to drop in 2 or 3 sentences. We're in a classroom, it's big enough for 40 people, there's 12 of us sitting here. Move on. Just give enough of the description to give the setting. And final notes, you don't want your character's second best day or second worst day. You want the worst day of their lives, best day of their lives. Or as the story goes on, their worst day was yesterday. All of a sudden, today is their worst day. That's that sort of thing, as long as we're dealing with extremes. I think that's just kind of inherent in how we set up the excitement and the danger and the whole concept of something unusual and new. I think that covers plotting.
What about, like, let's say George R.R. Martin, his books are huge,
Mhm.
so he doesn't really trade off for character development or description. So we're talking about like smaller books in this case.
That's the author of the Game of Thrones,
Yes.
Fire and Ice.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can break this rule if your readers are willing to go along with it. I mean, if you want to, let me back up a second. There's still 100% of story. So what's his name, Martin? If he's doing 50% character development, 50% plot, and his readers are okay with it, that's fine. It's still an adventure, right?
Right.
I mean, just because his readers are willing to deal with that extra verbiage. Now, I think Tolkien got away with that too, right? Faulkner. God help me. Something happens and then.
So is
Here's the
fantasy
wood.
sci-fi a subgenre of adventure?
It's the other way around, but yeah, that was my response to it. That has to do with genre. The fantasy genre, you can go way longer. That's like,
Okay.
you know, industry. So
Right.
if you're just talking about action adventure, it's, you know, it's a little more streamlined, but when you're in the fantasy genre, then action adventure is almost like a subgenre of that. So adventure is kind of, you know, like the epic quest, you know, is like expected in epic fantasy. But yeah, that's more of, that has to do with the genre and the word counts that are expected and allowed for
Yeah.
that genre more so.
Thanks, CK. That's a good point to bring up genres, and I think the readers, they accept it and they expect it because you also owe them the definition of the world and the rules within the world, sci-fi and fantasy.
Exactly, world building.
Yep. Okay, Pat.
With Martin, he's also well established. People know who he is. If you're coming in with your first novel, it's gonna be tough to get it published at 200,000 words or something. So
That too.
another one, Stephen King, he can bring these, you know, It or whatever, but he was already established. His first novel was a small one in comparison.
It's fine. I'll share personally here. My 12 novels in my submarine series, every one of them is 64,000 words plus or minus 4,000. Short, quick, boom. And I'll get hit for it. My reviews will say the good reviews will say 4 stars. I love the pace, I love this, I love that, authentic. Then they'll say, a little light on character development. And I'm like, guilty as charged. My character developed over 12 books as much as, you know, someone might develop them in 1 book or half a book. And that's okay, that's
You
what I'm
apply
doing.
the exact same criticism to Hornblower, you know, which the character was developed over 14 books or something.
I'll have to trust you on that one, I haven't read.
Well, James Bond.
Guilty as charged, hey. I haven't read every book on the planet.
Yeah, it's just that sounds like that's your genre.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, oh, good.
Even then, I only read small bits of my genre. It's hard to read your own genre
Yeah.
too sometimes.
It is hard
And the
to
irony is I'm gonna tell you to do it when we talk about writing.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll just tell you to do it now. I'm gonna back up. Pat, hold your thought.
Mhm.
I just remembered in my notes, and I didn't mention it, but Richard, you made me think of it. You want to pass the credibility test in your plot, you want to get some people that are well-read in your genre to look at it before you write, just share your idea of your plot, or, kind of like the sanity check, and then after you're done, to make sure you've hit the tropes, you've got the excitement, you've got the abnormal new area, you've got the character that you want, and it'll save you a lot of heartache before you put it out there and you get bad reviews. Because you can fix it a lot faster than you think, if it's repairable. I mean, if you get the advice up front, you'll probably be okay. I wouldn't even write a book before I talk to one guy, I call him my mentor, buddy that writes. Like, if I don't go to him, I have another guy I go to. If I don't get at least one of them to say, yeah, it makes sense, I won't write the book. Pat.
Oh,
I did a lot of
just-
talking since you
No,
had an
that-
idea, I'm
that's
sorry.
all right. I was gonna use, Ian Fleming or James Bond as another example where the character isn't well developed. He's thrown into action situation after situation, but we as the reader know very little about him. Maybe some of the newer movies give you more background, but the books don't tell you anything about him. It's just move the action, here's the goal, go do it.
Yep, and James Bond is in my notes, I just didn't get to bringing him up. And the same buddy that I used as a sanity check, when we talk about getting on my book, 9, 10, 11, 12, he's like, some people might say that's going too far in your genre, military genre. But then he said, no, your characters are more like James Bond types, because they're not military heroes. They're actually mercenary misfits. They're all castaways from legitimate navies across the world, and they became more like James Bond. And their backgrounds are kind of murky, but they're going to do the same thing over and over because that's what they do. And if they develop, it's almost by accident. It takes you back to your point, Sandy, where because I was thrown into a room with a deranged woman, I had to develop, I had to grow. And that's how my characters grow. It's by accident. And like James Bond, I don't know how James Bond did not develop anymore over 40 years since Ian Fleming started. But like you said, at some point, people are interested and they want to know, and so you'll see that fleshed out in the movies a little bit. Okay, cool. Let's talk about writing for a little bit. After all, the name of this topic is writing adventure fiction. So let's talk about the actual words. Sandy, what is the first word up there?
Pace.
Yeah, you like that, don't you? You
Yeah.
want to go fast. Characters make quick decisions. Oh, wait a minute. We're down here. Pace. Tighten, 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 and then stop. Don't tighten forever. You'll go crazy. Seriously. Like, I want to go back and tighten my first book from 13 years ago, and I actually started doing that 2 years ago when I rewrote it until my mentor said, psh, everybody has thought of it, don't do it. Pat.
Can you give an example of what you mean by tighten, tighten, tighten?
Boy, will I. Hold on. If I can find my notes.
Imagine the spring.
That's kind of what I was thinking too, but I like examples.
We'll do examples. I've gotten so excited with your feedback that oh, here we go. Okay. We touched on doing with less description and less character development. So that'll be inherent in the tightening. A lot of white space. So that dialogue, for example, is a good place to make this happen. If your character's going on and on and on and on, stop. Bring it back. Have a few lines. Let someone cough. Let someone knock something over. Let some action happen. Then more dialogue, because it'll turn out to be more white space. That being said, I'll make the point. Once we get to a lot of white space and a lot of action happening, it's like a sprint, and you don't want to have a sprint for a whole book. You're going to have paragraphs, and you're going to have complete chapters that are more slow. Like when I'm doing my submarine stuff, if I have a scene where they just escaped a torpedo by by the hair on their head, I'll take a breather. I'll go back to something on land where someone's plotting and working on the next thing, because I want the heart to be beating at the end of the narrow escape from the torpedo, which is, that's one like my trope. If people aren't running from torpedoes in my books, I fail, so. In my last book, actually, was back-to-back torpedo exchanges, but then I made sure that the chapters around them were more restful, more informative. Did I see a hand go up, or am I gonna keep going? I'll keep going.
I think you psychically saw mine, because I was just thinking something, that when Sylvia and I write romance adventure, hers is like real life and mine is fantasy, but, or like after like a big heavy action scene, then it's good for the next chapter to be more like developing the romantic relationship.
Okay.
Just on what you said.
A lot of the examples we're looking for, Pat, are what not to do. One thing is varying the word choice. Like if I'm gonna expose something I did in my last novel that I had to fix was my characters were pointing their noses at people too much. John pointed his nose at his wife. He pointed his nose at Cindy. He pointed his nose at Pat. Well, no. At some point, those become little speed bumps. You don't set the setting, you establish the setting. You don't race the race, you run the race, and you sprint the race. And if you see this word repetition, those become little speed bumps you want to avoid.
They also come across as a cliche if you use it too much also.
Yeah, and you do want to avoid cliches too. That's another speed bump. Dialogue tags is one way to speed things up. And there are two approaches here for dialogue tags. These are actually in your notes. You can either do, this is what I recommend, either he said, she said, he asked, she asked. Don't go down the road of they opined, or they retorted, or they snapped, because that's usually an attempt to cover weak dialogue. Let the dialogue carry itself. And eventually, once you see he said, she said, it's almost subconsciously ignored by the reader. So if you use those simpler tags, he said, she said, he asked, she asked, you'll help the reader move through the dialogue faster. Lang.
I would tend to agree with you, but Terry Pratchett, my favorite line that he ever wrote was, this guy was falling off a cliff, and the line is, he opined. I cracked up out loud.
I
So
love
if
that
he said,
one.
he said, I would be like, that's not so funny.
The opine. Exceptions to every rule.
Yeah.
But you gotta use those exceptions.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Small doses.
That was really just to share with the class.
Yeah, no, it was good. I like
Option 2 is no dialogue tags.
Yeah,
This is where I'm
that's where
trying in my
Yeah.
last books.
Yeah, I like the dialogue.
Just leave them out.
It's hard to do. That's why I had gotten trouble with my noses pointed. I'm still new at this. I've been writing for umpteen years, but when I switched just a year ago from he said, she said to no tags, because I thought it would flow better and get better pace. And it should if you do it right. But it has to be natural, so you're getting on the beats. You know, I have a character that smokes, so I can use that crutch. You know, he raised the moral portal. He flipped flint into flame with his Zippo lighter. It's not my line, that was horrible. Let me come up with some more examples, because we are running out of time. Your participation has been great thus far, so that's a good thing that we're running out of time. Because I was going to do exercises to have the dialogues that we're having, but we're having them. So I want to just make sure that I get the information out. Adverbs, adverbial clauses. Has anybody here ever been encouraged to use adverbs happily, successfully, in a successful manner?
I have in one English class in college, we were encouraged to write like mid-century writing. We had to go back and look at examples. Patricia Highsmith wrote The Talented Mr. Ripley. Her writing's full of adverbs, and it worked. So that was an example that the instructor or the professor used that I remember to this day. And I just went back and read one of her books recently, and oh, look at that adverb, look at that
Uh-huh.
adverb. And her editor would have, shot her down, but she's considered classist.
Well, what do you think of it now? Now that you go back and read it, do they stand out as?
They stand out as awful when I read it, but again, when we had to do it, we had to write like it was 1950, it's not 1950.
No. And your tendency is to throw in everything that's in your brain onto paper. And when you're stuck trying to do that infinite effort, you start reaching for adverbs, right?
Yeah.
Happily. John walked across the room quickly. Well, John trotted. Should have trotted to make it a better example. Or John strode. She ran quickly, or did she sprint? He walked slowly, he walked cautiously, or did he creep? You know this game. Yes, Sandy?
So, first person versus third person, I'm sorry I haven't read your books, but is there one that's better for adventure fiction than another?
It is a good question, and that's my way of saying I don't have a good answer. I find that I can only tell you what I've done in my genre, so I'll do that. In military fiction, it's third person. And I see a lot, we're gonna spend the rest of the time talking about this. We've got 2 minutes. Careful about omniscience, slipping into omniscient voice. And I'm glad you brought this up. I'm gonna close my notes and we're gonna finish by answering Sandy's questions. You want to be in John's opinion. You want to be in one character's head for an entire scene. I'll even say an entire chapter. Even though I violated that in the past, but at least within one scene. You want to be within your character's head. If we're gonna describe what's going on in this room, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people. We could have 10 perspectives, right? Point of view character. Obviously, if you're writing first person, you know who it is. It's going to be that first person, and you should keep that throughout the whole novel. I've seen first person in the paranormal novels. In fact, I'm an exception. I see more first person than not, and it's more of a familiar sort of thing. Like, hey, I just smushed that demon from the 7th level of hell using my whatever spell, and now I'm going to go have coffee with my boyfriend who doesn't listen to me. That works. Because you want this kind of a snarkiness around it, if that's a word, snarkiness. In the military genres, you're looking for more formal, so I went into it with third person, and that's what everybody does. But I stay within my character's head. I see too many people. There's a guy, I won't say his name, but he is a Tom Clancy writer. He's in my network of people that help each other. He is, so-and-so wrote the book of Tom Clancy novels. He's at that level. And he's jumping from head to head every paragraph. Because it's almost like a Martin thing, he can get away with it. So if we're gonna describe what's going on in this room, we could be in my head in 1 second, Sandy's head the next. And as soon as you jump from one head to another, you're an omniscient person, you're playing God. Try not to play God, you're just a writer, right? You have to be a little bit of God, because you're saying the world, you're making people do things, it's like mini God, but don't do omniscient. Please stick with third person, or first person, but stay within the head of your character for every scene. I'm gonna get off my soapbox now, and thank you all for great participation. Any last questions before we break up? We've got no time, but if there's a burning question, I'm here. Sandy?
Clive Cussler called and wanted you to be a partner, would you say yes?
I would, because I met his group. When I won that award,
Yeah.
I met his writing group, and he is very coaching. He looks for coachable people. He's honestly, genuinely in it to help his fans and to help good writers be better writers.